Everyone all right?
Yes.
Percival, we've neutralized the threat on our side.
Good. I managed to capture one of the half-breeds. Rendezvous back at Regent.
Acknowledge. Let's go.
The Order 1886 was developed by Ready at Dawn and Sony Santa Monica and published by Sony Computer Entertainment. The Order 1886 released on February 20th, 2015, solely on the PlayStation 4. The game opens with Sir Galahad's head being forcibly dunked into cold water repeatedly. After a few times, the guards in red take him back to his cell, only to return the next morning to repeat the process. This time he escapes, killing both guards that were responsible for him. He ends up on the roof surrounded by guards and his peers. Threatened with death if he does not comply, Galahad responds that he's already dead and falls off the roof into the water below. We then flash back to Galahad looking over the city of London waiting for his next order. We learn that there is unrest in the city and Galahad runs to join Lady Igraine to fight the anti-government rebellion as well as the werewolves in the area called Lycans. Successfully stopping both the rebels from causing any more damage and killing the last Lycan in the area, Galahad and the rest of his fellow knights return to the council at the Palace of Westminster and discuss the possible conspiracy of how the rebellion and the recent Lycan attacks are related. After a vote against looking into the possible conspiracy, Galahad is convinced by fellow knight Percival to join him in a covert mission looking into the matter, regardless of what just happened in the court. Thus begins your journey as Galahad, a knight of the Round Table sworn to protect the realm, and your investigation into the rebellion and the recent Lycan uprisings and how it all connects. First of all, the story is straightforward. There are no underlying themes or the like. It is what it is. The Order 1886 is a story-driven game, and the game will direct you from moment to moment. There is no free roam or side missions. The campaign is chapter to chapter, and you have no choice in the matter. It is unfortunate, though, that the writing for the Order 1886 is flawed. For one, the characters are flat and boring. They show emotion and it feels genuine, but it doesn't feel deserved. You will never know the backstory of any of the characters throughout the game, which makes it difficult to give a damn. There is so little development for the characters that when they turn against you, help you, make lame jokes, die, survive, and the like, that I felt completely devoid of emotion. When one character dies and Galahad is obviously affected by this person's death, I can see that Galahad is obviously distraught, but I kept asking myself, why do I give a shit? This person gave me orders and was suspicious, but I didn't know anything about him or his relationship to my character. With Lady Igraine and Galahad, there's a hint of an underlying possible romance, but it's never explained outside the cheeky one-liners. They like each other, but that isn't enough for me to want them to be together or even care. The lack of backstory isn't the only problem either. Some characters are just poorly written, period. The biggest example of that is the Lord Chancellor, the man leading the council. He is the absolute worst leader that the Round Table could have because he shoots down every possible thing that is brought up to him. How the Order has lasted this long under his rule is beyond comprehension. At the end, something is revealed and the Lord Chancellor tells Galahad to keep it quiet, to keep the Order together, but it feels like he's just saving his own skin rather than letting a newer, better, smarter, and more efficient order coming from it. I know the ending explains it just a little bit, but he doesn't even try to hide his reluctance. His son does a far better job than doing it than he does. The characters aren't the only ones that aren't fully explained either. I honestly believe the entire idea of the Order and the Lycan half-breeds is interesting, but nothing is ever explained. The game assumes you know everything there is to know, and while sometimes I love the idea of something not holding my hand, the Order leaves you in the dust. Who is the Order? What do they do? Do they fight the rebels? For the government? Do they fight alongside the government? Do they only fight the supernaturals? They can't be completely secret if the police instantly recognize the knights as generals. Who are the Lycans and what have they been doing up to this point? The game starts in media res, but when the game goes to the beginning of the story, it still feels like we're in the middle of a much bigger plot. If the game had begun with a cinematic in which they describe everything, even if it were generic, like since the dawn of time there have been creatures that have attacked humanity in the dark, we are the Order and we defend the people against vampires and werewolves, then I would have been more knowledgeable and more entertained. Even in The Witcher 3, there's a short cinematic where a narrator explains why there's so many creatures in the Witcher universe. The Order would have benefited from that. The dialogue isn't too bad though. There are a few lines I had trouble with. I mean, the first one being at the beginning of the game after your first gunfight. The Frenchman you're with says something along the lines of, "But you need passion to fight man." And to which you, Galahad, responds with, "We don't fight men." I mean, I understand that he meant that they defend the common people against the threat of Lycans, but he said this literally after killing a bunch of human rebels. People, men, literally after killing men. The other problem with this dialogue is what I mentioned before, in that they'll say a line, but then it's never explored. When you first meet the rebel leader, you'll learn that she's a warrior queen, but then that's it.
I surprise you again, Knight.
The famous warrior queen who took up arms against our army in India. Our generals reported you killed in Gwalior.
I have always benefited from the underestimation of the fool. I'll get the door. Knight, come take a look.
Another example is when Galahad says Percival is a brother and a teacher to him, but that's never shown either. All you see throughout is a man who gives you orders, and then you see him making shady deals with people in the distance. Third example is when Lady Igraine says that she and Galahad don't deserve this life and they deserve better together, but then that's it. There's nothing else to back that up. What's the significance of the rebel leader being a warrior queen? Why even mention it if it doesn't matter? Why is Percival so dear to Galahad besides being a brother and a teacher? Not even like a small anecdote to prove it? Why is Lady Igraine so attracted to Galahad? What was their history together besides being a teacher and a pupil? There's just a lot of throwaway lines that are meant to add emotion and tension but just leave more questions than answers. That being said though, you take away the characters and focus on the story alone, it's straightforward and has very few problems. At its basic form, the story is decent. A team of people fight against supernatural beings that is trying to gain power and spread their influence. There's a villain in the story that you go up against towards the end, but there's no resolution with this person. You fail to kill him and then that's it, which is crazy considering he has such a huge role in the entire game, even if he's in the background most of the time. It's also obvious that this is intended to be a franchise. At this point in time, that is still up in the air, but for the first game to leave this many questions, it's pretty bad, and with a hasty ending meant to lead into a new game, it feels off. The gameplay is another potential problem in that when you play, it doesn't feel bad, but at the same time the shooting segments feel generic. If you've played a good third-person cover shooter, you've played The Order 1886. The Order 1886 doesn't just hold your hand throughout the game, it shoves you violently from one scene to the next with elegance. It is the absolute furthest from a free-roaming choice-making video game. There are no choices in this game, with the exception of a few quick-time events that determine how you will hit an enemy. There is an ability to explore a few nooks and crannies that are out of the way, but they are very few and far between. This game is basically one long hallway. The guns feel great and punchy, and some of them are actually incredible. Such weapons include an arc gun that shoots a focused beam of lightning that can just completely annihilate your opponents, as well as a gun that can shoot thermite into the air, and then you can ignite and set your enemies on fire. Unfortunately, these awesome weapons are only usable a few times in the game, and you will otherwise be using regular rifles, shotguns, and pistols, which only add to the generic feeling of that third-person shooting. This is not to be confused with the feel of it though. The gunplay feels fine, and I never had a problem with the cover system, the camera, or the shooting. There is a feature in which everything goes into slow motion and you have a limited time to shoot enemies with a handgun, but this is only invoked Deadeye from Red Dead Redemption, a game that did this mechanic far better than The Order 1886. You'll find yourself shooting humans more than what the Order is supposedly supposed to be fighting against. The few times you do fight against the Lycans, it's lame. If you're not fighting a large Lycan boss, which is done through a giant quick time sequence, you're fighting smaller Lycans in the same exact way each time. And what I mean is that every time smaller Lycans attack you, you're in a room full of stacked crates and they come from around the corner. You have to shoot, dodge, shoot, and then finish them with a quick time event.
Make that more than one.
I'm within. Are you Monsieur, hold on. I'm almost there.
The AI of the Lycan is flat out moronic compared to the human AI. When you're not in full control of Galahad, you're basically watching out for QuickTime events to progress the story. Since the game is essentially one long cutscene, adding QuickTime events is a way for you to stay involved, because otherwise you'd probably find yourself sat for an hour waiting for the next shooting segment. The overall tone of the game is very moody, but I like the constant gray hue of London and Whitechapel, but there's very little humor in the game alone, and the humor that is in the Order is much drier than I'm used to. It's also pretty inappropriately used, in that Lady Igraine is meant to be the lady that jokes about Galahad's older age, but the way she says youth always prevails, it makes her look like a jumped up little shit. As for the Frenchman who's constantly wooing women, it's done poorly and it's made to look like the one person you can never count on. I mean, these are my choices. I mean, someone who is constantly telling me how old I am, or someone that is immediately distracted by anyone who might have a vagina. Visually, the game is sterling. It's beyond beautiful. In 2017, I think this game is still one of the best looking games out there. If the point of the visuals in this game was to prove the power of the PlayStation 4, they beat that goal by a mile. Sometimes though, I get the feeling that they put the tech ahead of the creativity, in that they put more time and effort in slick, black, admirable hair of Galahad than they did into the writing of his dialogue. There are no cutscenes either in the traditional sense. The whole game looks the same, with cutscenes playing out and then transitioning immediately into gameplay without any hesitation, so you might find yourself sat for a few seconds waiting for the next thing to happen, only to realize you've been given control. This still holds up as well. Whereas in Max Payne 3 the frame rate drops and the increase in random tropical color highlights tell you that the game is loading, in this game there's nothing of that sort. The transition is seamless. The smoky slums, the tiny pitter patter on the concrete, the slight moving hair physics, the motion capture, they all add to the game's beauty. It looks absolutely stunning. On the visuals alone, this game is a perfect score. Perhaps since the experience is more controlled and more linear, it allowed developers to focus more on the immediate detail, but that doesn't mean they had to go as far as they did. Sometimes you can catch glimpses of the world outside the playable area, and it really makes you wish you can go out there and see more. All throughout this game, I also had no issues with loading, screen tearing, frame rate drops, or any other visual glitches whatsoever. The audio is just as fantastic as the visuals. The audio really comes to shine in the voice acting. As I mentioned before, the writing may not be entirely on point, but the voice acting definitely is. Galahad and Lady Igraine's anger, along with the pomp and circumstance of the Lord Chancellor, both sound genuine, and it's obvious these voice actors are professionals.
As long as its campaign of anarchy and terror is allowed to continue, the plague of Lycan infestation that has infected our city will only grow more intolerable.
The Lord Chancellor will thus agree to the urgency of a mission into Whitechapel.
Whitechapel is a matter for the civil authorities.
When the noble Arthur sought to contest for truage with the Roman Emperor Lucius, he did not trouble himself with issues of jurisdiction.
Do not presume to quote history to me, Sir Percival. I've seen more of history than you shall ever know. I remind the knights here assembled that the threat to this order comes not only from without, but within.
There isn't much to say besides that. I mean, it's brilliant. The music is another high point, reflecting the grimy and moody tone the game establishes with its visuals. Two of my favorite video game tracks of all time are actually from The Order 1886. The first one being Agamemnon Rising. It plays when Galahad and his associates are boarding a zeppelin, and the sound of immediacy from the violins is an adrenaline rush. The second is the edge of sanity, which is just a soft violin playing with a quick succession of strings in the background that feels almost like an undeserved welcome into the world of The Order 1886. Jason Graves did a great job with the rest of the soundtrack too. The game has the sound of a proper orchestra, as if it were a real Hollywood movie. In summation, I'm actually quite disheartened in the result of coming back to this game, because when this game first released, I went ahead and I invested in the collector's edition, which came with a little statue of Galahad and a little tin box that you put your game in. Regardless of what I had said and what I'm about to say, I do not regret this purchase. Back when it first came out, I played the game twice in a row and I absolutely loved it, and I was ready for more, all while completely deaf to the criticisms. However, coming back to the game since its release, I'm sad I found so much wrong with it, and the fact that I found all these things without looking for them, it's just... I was sad playing it and trying to get that feeling back, but I ended up just asking the questions I asked here, such as, wait, there needs to be more detail on this. What happened to these characters? Who were they? How did they used to be? How were they connected? The idea of the Order 1886 feels like a genuinely great one. I won't say original, but it's definitely not explored heavily in the video game world. A secret society fighting supernatural beasts like werewolves while both coexisting in a normal history? I mean, it's almost like the Assassin's Creed franchise, and I actually find that interesting. However, the execution of the Order 1886 was just ultimately flawed. This game feels like it didn't know what it actually wanted. I mean, I don't mind being told a story I have no control in. That's just about every game besides the Telltale series. However, that story needs to be told well if that's going to be the case. I recognize that this game was going to be a platform for a franchise to build on, but this platform is already falling apart. The gameplay is totally solid, but I've played better third-person shooters, and this game just makes me want to go back to those. This game does shine in its visuals and its audio though. It's difficult to come up with a game that did both of those so well and so synchronized with each other. In the end, I wish my opinion of the Order 1886 never changed, so I could have shown my excitement, but that's no longer the case. I'm still hopeful for the game's future and hope that in future installments they tell a proper story from start to finish and actually flesh out some of these characters. My recommendation would be to simply watch a playthrough online if you can. As of recording this, the Order 1886 is actually on the PlayStation Network's flash sale, and it's only for $5.99, and I feel like if that's the price you're going to pay, this game is definitely worth it. Just an FYI, there's also no replay value, and the only DLC is outfits. Outfits which I got with my pre-order, and they're not exactly the greatest thing in the world either. So, the score I'm giving this game, The Order 1886 on the PlayStation 4, is a 5.
Tell me!
Out of 10.
I have just a thing, monsieur. If one of you ladies would reach into my pocket.
Give it here, love.
Is it sufficient, monsieur?
More than sufficient, I'd say.
Upstairs, then, if you please.